Hello, everybody, and welcome to Zeitguys, a podcast focused on the creation and analysis of culture. We hope to discuss a variety of fields such as literature, film, music, and so on, and especially look forward to speaking with and promoting new and independent creators from their respective fields. I am Alighieri, joined by my co-host Gallo, and today we will be discussing the TV drama A Night of Seven Kingdoms, based off of the novella The Tales of Dunk and Egg by George R.R. Martin, which is set in the same world as Game of Thrones, Song of Ice and Fire, but set a couple of centuries beforehand. Yeah, right, Gala?
Winter and before the coming winter, so somewhere in the region of between 50 and 100 years.
Right. So the show itself, unsurprisingly, has gained a lot of buzz around it because Game of Thrones was one of the last big cultural touchstones in pop culture that everyone watched and talked about. And so, whenever something new comes out, people talk about it, whether it ends up being good or not. Like House of the Dragon, that everyone talked about that when it came out, but it didn't get very positive reception, I don't think, or at least I didn't. I heard most of the people complaining about it. And then
And rest assured, I did not watch it either, and we're not going to talk about it.
right. Whereas Night of the Seven Kingdoms, I've heard mostly positive things with people talking about it. It's different than what well, here's how people talk about it. People say it's different than what one would normally expect from Martin's work, which people generally perceive to be more cynical and bleak, almost morally nihilistic outlook. That's how it's perceived. I haven't actually read the novels or watched the Game of Thrones, so I'm not going to make a definitive statement on that. But uh it's don't worry, some of that classic George R.R. Martin stuff that you always hear people talk about is still there, like it opening with the scene of a guy taking a shit. And, another
Yeah,
scene where we get a
yeah,
full
that's
front shot of a completely naked old man with his schlong hanging out and stuff like that. That's still there. So, if you came for, oh, yeah, and people dropping F bombs every 5 seconds and constantly talking about crapping and shitting and so on. So, that's still there. But
and
on the contrast, it is a story that takes a more idealistic, perhaps not so cynical view of knighthood and chivalry and, you know, actually morally upstanding characters. So, Gala, if you want to expound on that, or if you had another point.
about that, especially with the F bombs and all that, the Martin crassness, as I've collectively just referred to it as. When Game of Thrones was released about over 10 years ago at this point, thereabouts, I feel old. That crassness, that whole thing, was seen in contrast with the last fantasy epic everyone was familiar with, Lord of the Rings, which was the last fantasy epic anyone knew about that took itself and its setting seriously, which Martin's setting does. See, the contrast of like all these high lords and grand ladies and people of import and high renown, and in a fantasy setting, seeing all these crude things and doing all these crude things and showing the crass reality of life in the Middle Ages with a casual disregard was seen as refreshing and transgressive at the time. And it was part of the overall slide into subverting expectations thing that plagued popular media for the past 10 years. So at the time when Lord Eddard Stark, who was very main character coded when he was first introduced in the first episode of Song of Ice and Fire, was beheaded by episode somewhere between 5 and 6. I can't remember at this time. It was seen as shocking at the time, at a complete subversion of expectations. And that was basically what was the definitive aspect of Game of Thrones going forward and people's popular perception of Martin's work. Whereas today, much, much later, after all these years of such of such a version of expectation to the point where it's the expected norm and the done thing. You can't be sincere or authentic in any expression of anything. To see Duncan, this literally 6 to 7 foot tall Irishman from Galway, being cast as this gigantic lad who is kind of stupid, be completely sincere, polite, and honest, and earnest, and honorable to the point where he routinely shames everyone from whores to high lords by just being a good and honest person
Yeah, the way
is in itself a
I
subversion of
made a
expectation.
yeah, I made a
Right.
comparison while we were watching that he looks like, and like the way he behaves kind of reminds me of a slightly less bright Samwise Gamgee. So
Samwise Gamgee, if his autism was knighthood rather than gardening.
yeah, so that's definitely gives you a good idea of what our main protagonist is like in this show, and then the other protagonist, Egg. Do we want to spoil the thing with him?
Well, absolutely, because they're gonna find it in episode 3 anyway.
Okay, well, before we get to that, Egg, he's this random stable boy that Duncan meets early on in an inn, or that's how he appears, yet he's got a shaved head, completely shaved. And he seems far more bright than a random stable hand should be in a medieval setting like this. He knows a lot about the politics and history of the world, the realms, and all that.
Like
He knows
sing,
a lot about knighthood and so on. Yes, what were you saying?
and he knows a lot about all the famous knights. Like, obviously, like famous knights are there's songs sung of them in bars and all. That's a common thing in Westeros culturally. So the really famous knights, you'd expect a peasant boy to hear like of like the Grey Lion, or eventually when he comes about, the Mountain that Rides, because they're like famous across all the seven kingdoms. But Egg is standout because he seems to know a lot, including the family history of this random Kingsguard whose family owns half the crabber fleets in Westeros. And his excuse for knowing that is that he likes fishing.
Yeah. So, anyways, it turns out, well, let's get back to the plot. So Duncan, he was squire to another knight, Sir Arlen of Pennytree. And at the beginning, we see him burying Sir Arlen because he's died, I presume of old age. Um, and
Is that
then,
the biggest, whether it was old age or an infection
yeah,
on his arm?
or something like that. And then he does that. And then right after that, we get the scene of Duncan taking a crap, and we see the whole thing. And then after that, he goes to the stable, you know, gets his horse and heads off to this local jousting tourney, where Egg ends up following him and tries to become his squire. So I'll give the show compliments here. It does the whole jousting tournament, the atmosphere of it, and the actual joust itself. Those are pretty impressive, and they do feel like you know something straight out of medieval European history. Although one strange thing is the first jousting scene we see is at night, which doesn't
Makes no
really,
sense.
yeah, it makes no
Yeah.
sense from a just a visual perspective. Like, as this is a piece of television, why are you having this thing be at night where you want to show off you're impressive? We got horses, real horses, and people in these nice night costumes, jousting in that. But you can't. It's all obscured because of the time of day, and then historically, it doesn't
Yeah.
make sense because these events. Why would they be held at night? Before like electronic and or even gas, yeah, before gaslight, you couldn't really do stuff at night, especially not big
Yeah.
spectacles like jousting.
And those braziers would not have carried enough light. I
No,
can only excuse this as maybe it was a plot point in the book, like maybe there's some ritual reason why at first one had to be at night, but that was never explained in the show, so we have no idea because we haven't read the original source material for this book.
right. So it. does a good job of capturing the whole atmosphere of a jousting tournament. And I can't jousting tournament, and I can't remember the last time we've really seen that in a piece of popular culture. Like
I think I
the
can. There's
yeah,
what was that movie? Uh, it was a movie. It was a night on night thing. It was set in France. I can't remember. It was released about 7 years ago, I think. But before that, the one that actually had jousting was A Knight's Tale, which is kind of irreverent and funny depiction of essentially this exact same story of like a hedge knight trying to pass himself off as
well,
a
I
real
mean,
knight in a tournament.
isn't that just the story from Chaucer though?
Yeah, it was based in Chaucer.
Yeah. So I haven't seen that specific film, but yes, the whole medieval historical epic. I know that's not what this show is, but that's kind of died out. You don't really see adaptations of medieval period anymore, and if you do, it's very, slopified. It's everything's gray and colorless, and everything is miserable and dreary. Like,
And everything is negative and cynical. And that was even before Martin. Martin's not responsible for
yeah,
that trend in Hollywood
like
regarding the Middle Ages.
Kingdom of Heaven. Everything is shot with
Yeah.
that awful blue filter for a lot of
When
the
they're, it's a,
film.
when in Europe and
Yeah,
everything's bright when in Middle East.
yeah, yeah. It's that we're getting a little off topic. I just wanted to give the show compliment for capturing that historical element, which obviously Martin's work is heavily inspired by European, specifically British medieval history.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It
yeah,
is. It was worth going on a tangent at that point because it does capture that feel of medievalness despite the Martin Slop crassness.
yeah,
If he took that out, if he was a bit more dignified, it would put it up a bunch more points in basically everyone's books. Because as it stands, despite being Martin Slop and despite the crassness, it is already highly regarded by a lot of people. Even though it's the narrative wise, it's just kind of okay. At least the adaptation, not the book. So it would have been much better and better received if it did take itself seriously. If it was a bit more dignified. Like, we don't need to see the scenes when people go to the bathroom. No one cares. No one
yeah.
wants that.
But for some reason, it
So,
has to be in there.
oh yeah, my disgust reflex did not have a good time during that this series.
Yes,
However, I will warn the viewers: it's not all the time. It's just a few times, and it's just annoying more than anything else. It takes you out of it.
it's less often from Game of Thrones, from what I've heard.
Well, in Game of Thrones, it is not all the time either. It's just that because of the sheer amount of episodes of Game of Thrones, the sheer number of things can be remembered. It's greater because
Right.
there's like 8 seasons of that or something.
Yeah. Game of Thrones, were the episodes an hour long or
Generally
40
40 to an
minutes?
hour long.
Well, like 40 with, hour with commercial breaks. Cause yeah. So
Yeah,
the Night of Seven Kingdoms, actually, we noticed it's a bit shorter. Episodes are around 30-ish minutes. So that's, you can tell also it's lower budget in general. It still looks impressive. It's got a good amount of actors, decent mixed bag costume design, and then obviously getting the horses would have cost a lot of money. And
let's talk about the costume design there because that actually is hit or miss. Because like when it's great, it's great. It's definitely got the low fantasy feel without
yeah,
being too absurd. Like the Apple guy Fossaway's armor is believable. It's shaped all in the proper ways of armor. It's just very ornate
yeah.
and appropriate for a guy whose household is all about apples and orchards.
And then you have the King's Guard, who look like they walked out of Halloween City with their armor. Just
Like
this,
like
like, plastic looking bright white armor. It
it's clearly meant to be metal that's painted white, but it doesn't look metal at all. They
no,
fail the effect.
yeah. And then the Targaryen armor. It looks bizarre and like something out of a 80s dark fantasy film, but it does look good and menacing. It really captures the aura that that house is supposed to have, where there are these, big menacing dragons.
Yeah,
Even
I do
though
like
even
the
though it looks
con.
very unconventional for armor.
It is unconventional, although in a bit of defense in that regard, I do like to compare and contrast Aryan Bright Flame's armor, which is incredibly menacing and draconic, with the absurd visor helm he has, which does work. It is practical. We do see him open and close it every now and again, so it's not clearly not getting in his way.
Yeah.
And I compare and contrast that with his uncle's armor, which is his uncle. It was actually the uncle's son's armor, which is the same theme, the dragon theme, the fluted armor, the dragon crest. But you can tell their uncle's armor is designed to appear more noble than the nephew's armor,
Yeah.
despite being both dragon theme and black. It was a nice detail. I like that touch.
Yeah. It does a lot to tell you about the characters who wear the armor without needing to, tell you, even though we get a fair amount of that too. Like,
I wonder which one's the Baratheon.
yeah. Oh, yeah, the one with the giant antlers on his
And
helmet. Never would have
I love House
guessed.
Baratheon.
Yeah. He Lionel Baratheon, he's probably the most entertaining character in the show so far, even though he does have kind of that Martin crassness you talked about. He's still easily the most entertaining guy on the screen whenever he's there.
He does, but he's also clearly meant to be in universe a kind of a crass figure,
Yeah,
despite his high standing. Because he's
right.
clearly a guy who doesn't give a fuck. Who will just do a thing because it's cool or it's right.
Yeah.
That's why he's incredibly lovable. Although we have gotten way off the point of actually explaining the plot. Let's finish that first.
Yes, okay. So at the jousting tournament, the Targaryens come, and one of them, Arion, one of the princes, he sees this play going on where it's a female knight and she slays a dragon. And since House Targaryen, their emblem is a dragon, he takes that as an instance of lese majesté, and he starts breaking the fingers of the puppeteer. And so Duncan, being very committed to the ideals of chivalry in defense of the innocent, attacks him and beats him bloody, and he is quickly apprehended by Arion's guards, and Arion is about to kill him when Egg comes and demands that he stops, and it's revealed that Egg is actually Aegon Targaryen. And so he is a prince of the blood. And then if you want to go on, Gal, because you know the whole lore with the Targaryen thing and the politics better.
Okay, well, to those who don't know, The Song of Ice and Fire, the books, or the TV show Game of Thrones, the skinny of this is this: the Valyrians are a race that are very high fantasy coded over in Essos, which is the gigantic ass eastern continent across the narrow sea from Westeros. The less said about George R.R. Martin's geographic world building, the better. So I won't comment on that. But long story short, they're from a peninsula to the south of Essos at some point that was very volcanic, and it was known to be home to massive amounts of dragons. And the Valyrians are these tall, elegant, pale-skinned, silver white-haired race with striking purple eyes, who are renowned blood magic practitioners throughout the world and sorcerers,
They're the
and had
Normans, but more evil.
yeah, they're very evil coded. Think Elric and Melbourne, the Kingdom, if you know that reference. Uh, Long story short, basically they did too much blood magic, and presumably the gods got pissed. Which gods? Presumably every single one, because the entire peninsula was destroyed in a volcanic eruption. Pretty much the entire race of the Valyrians were destroyed, as far as we can tell, including most of the dragons, except for House Targaryen and its own dragons, which, according to legend, I'm not sure I got this right, lifted the entirety of Dragonstone, which the literal mountain or piece of mountain that their house was built upon, across the world, across the narrow sea, before dropping it at what became known as King's Landing, wherein the first thing the Targaryens did was mount their dragons, marry their sisters, and conquer Westeros.
Yes. So
So,
evil magic,
yeah,
dragon-blooded Normans, and
essentially,
yeah,
because this is basic fantasy Britain, the first men are the Celts, the Andals are the Anglo-Saxons who came and conquered them, brought in the faith of the Seven and the ideals of knighthood and chivalry, and the Valerians are the Normans.
yes. Even though Britain, actual British history, Normans would be the ones who brought the concept of French chivalry to England. But yes, that's a different thing. His that you know, fantasy. It doesn't need to map onto the history. It's inspired by. People
Yeah,
can
I'm
be
not,
a
I'm not,
bit
I'm
too
not too.
autistic with historicism and these sorts of things, but that's just a reflex, I guess, is what it was. But
Yeah,
yeah,
so that's the long skinny of the Targaryens. Yeah,
so obviously after assaulting a prince of the blood, Duncan is in trouble. However, he's reminded by one of the less evil Targaryens, the uncle. What was his name?
Daron. No, Daron was the son. Fuck, I can't
Well, in
remember
any
his name now.
case, he was the crown prince. I mean, he's older, but because people hear crown prince and they're going to think younger, he's older and he has his own sons. But he is the one who seems like he's more just, and he is one of the few so sorry, let's
Baylor,
walk it
that's
back
his name, Baylor.
Baylor. So let's walk it back a bit. When Duncan first arrives at the tournament, he's trying to get one of the lords to sponsor him, and he talks to them all about how him and Sir Alan fought for those lords and did that, but none of them remember Sir Arlen, except for Baylor. You said that was his name.
Yeah, Baylor remembered him because he
Baylor
fought in a lot of
remembers.
tourneys.
Yes, and he actually fought against Baylor in a tourney, right? In a jousting tourney.
Yeah, no, not Baylor. He fought against the Grey Lion, who was a Lannister lord, and despite winning and knocking him off his horse, gave him back his gear and horse without ransom.
Right.
No, Baylor did that to someone else. Yeah,
Anyway,
to the Grey Line. Yeah, go ahead.
mm, anyways, so Baylor reminds him that they probably will cut off your arm and your leg because you punched him and kicked him, but you can demand right to trial by combat, and so he does that, and Arion invokes the his right to a
Trial of Seven.
trial of seven, where it's basically seven knights versus each. It's a trial by combat, so whoever wins is the one favored by the gods and is just. But it's seven versus seven, and so
Mhm.
Arion, obviously being a royal prince, has no trouble getting his seven together. Whereas Duncan has more trouble with that, and he needs to go around and ask for help, and he gets help from two knights.
Beastbury, Harding,
Yeah, those two knights who are less important. Lord Baratheon, the
initially Fossaway.
Fossaway, yeah, initially Fossaway, who uh, Duncan pretty quickly becomes friends with his younger cousin, Raymond.
Uh, I forget his name.
Raymond,
Raymond, yeah.
yes, Raymond. And then that brings us up to what? Oh, yes, and there was the Mad Knight, the one-eyed one. And
Robin
anyways,
Riceling.
right. So, anyways, the ones that matter for the purposes of the story are Baratheon and Fossway. So we get to the day of the tourney, and well, not the tourney, the trial of seven, and Duncan only has six people. He doesn't have the full seven for the roster. And he's like, okay, well, it doesn't look like the Targaryens only have six too, right? So, this might be fine. But it turns out Fossway he was offered a lordship in exchange for defecting to the Targaryen side, so he goes and fights for them, and the Targaryens have 7. Now, Dunk only has 5 people, and so if he can't get the other 2, then he automatically forfeits his right to trial of 7 and is declared guilty. So Raymond, who is furious at his cousin's betrayal, asks Dunk to knight him, but Lord Baratheon ends up knighting Raymond instead because Dunk has to go off and try and appeal to the lords in the crowd for a 7th knight. Because if they only have 6, that's still not enough. And eventually, he makes his appeal on that, but no one answers. And then Baratheon comes in and he's willing to fight.
No. It's Baelor
Baelor,
himself.
yes, Baelor. Sorry, Baelor. Baelor Targaryen comes and he sides with Duncan and is willing to fight on his side. And this obviously is a bit of drama and tension because he's fighting against his own family here, and the men of the Kingsguard, who are part of the Targaryen 7, are, sworn by oath to not harm him. And so the melee begins. Duncan gets knocked off his horse and is knocked out in the mud. And then we get this very extended flashback sequence, which was fairly boring, to be honest, for most of it, where we find, Duncan was originally a street urchin, and he had all sorts of horrible stuff happen. A typical sad backstory thing. And then one day, him and his friend, I don't believe we ever, no, we did get her name, but I don't
Rafe.
recall. Rafe. Yes. So, anyways, she gets killed by this one brigand who's, one of the local thugs. And then they're about to kill Duncan too. And then Sir Arlen a penny tree, comes out of a bar puking and, extremely
Completely
drunk.
drunk.
Yeah, but he fights them off. He kills both of the thugs that are about to attack Duncan. And then he just walks off, and Duncan ends up following him until he eventually lets him become his squire. And then we return to the melee, where eventually Duncan is able to overcome Arian and gets him to withdraw his accusation. And Duncan, it seems like everything's going to go well for him. He wants to swear himself to Baelor.
Baelor, yeah.
Yes, Baelor. But it turns out Baelor got the back of his skull caved in with a mace by his brother.
By his brother Maker.
Yeah, by his brother during the actual joust. So he dies. He falls dead there and dies in Duncan's arms. And so this complicates the situation. And Duncan eventually receives an offer from the brother. What'd you say his name was?
Maker, as well
Maker.
as but he also got one from Lionel first.
Yes, he got one from Baratheon and from Maekor to become a knight in their service. The Targaryens specifically offer him the position of having Egg, as in Aegon Targaryen, as his squire, but the condition is that he does it at the Summer Hall, right?
Yeah, Summerhall.
Yes. And Dunk is reluctant about that. He still wants to be a hedge knight and go his own way, essentially. And eventually, he Egg comes to him when he's going off and says, "Oh yeah, they agreed to let me be your squire as a knight errant, hedge knight." And so the two of them go off, and that's where the show is now, as of episode 6. We find out very quickly Egg was lying, and he just ran off on his own with Dunk again. And the rest of the Targaryens didn't actually agree to have him take him on as a squire. So,
unsurprisingly.
yes, so that's where the show is now as of episode 6. Anything you wanted to add, Gallo, to the summary?
No, summary wise, we crossed over a lot of details, including the romantic feelings he had to Tansel, who was the puppeteer girl who got her finger broken by Arian, uh, and the whole ordeal he had in trying to find a knight to vouch for him and all that. As Manfred and no one remembering Sir Arlen of Penetry, tragically, or the flashbacks with Sir Arlen, or Arlen's entire depictions, right? It just really showing him off as kind of a shit knight, despite clearly kind of being a badass for surviving to like 60 or 80 years old, has a hedge knight with many campaigns under his belt. But we'll get to those essentially. Oh, and also the Dorn question, which I don't believe we're going to discuss.
What would that be? The Dorn question?
The depiction of Dornishmen.
Okay. Uh, uh yeah. Uh so the show as a modern depiction of chivalry and knighthood, it's, you know, a lot of people when they talk about fantasy and how it's become a lot more cynical will blame Martin for it with Game of Thrones, A Song of Ice and Fire. So it is ironic here that the one of the better depictions of knighthood and chivalry, at least so far, that we see is from a adaptation of one of his works as well. Because as we've discussed, Duncan is very much a straightforward, chivalric knight that you wouldn't be surprised to see in the pages of Chrétien de Troyes or Sir Thomas Malory or any of the famous medieval, early modern chivalric romance writers.
If you've been following any of the discourse on Twitter, especially over the show, some of the defenders, at least one in particular, pointed this out, and I guess it could be interpreted that way that Martin, in fact, doesn't actually hate heroic characters. He's kind of obsessed with them in a way. And the argument goes essentially like this: he's obsessed with the kind of character who holds stubbornly to the truth and honor and idealism in a world that would essentially piss on you and laugh at you for being that naive and stupid. He's just absolutely incensed at people who will just go to the grave with that thing. And you could see that potentially if you squint your eyes sideways at the way it's depicted in Game of Thrones and this series as well. The problem with that interpretation is none of these good guys ever win. Is the problem? The honor and nobility never wins in the end because Martin wrote the entirety of A Song of Ice and Fire as his answer to Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, which he found is tiresomely unrealistic. So it's hard to give Martin even that credence in this regard. That's why Duncan stands out all the more, because Duncan actually is referenced in the Game of Thrones series itself on screen, where two of the characters, I think one was the young King Joffrey and his secret father, were looking through a book of heraldry and the ancient knights of all old. And some of these great knights only have like 1 or 2 pages, but Sir Duncan the Tall had 7, meaning that Sir Duncan the Tall lived long enough to be a legendary knight in his own right. And this is even foreshadowed in Knight of the Seven Kingdoms himself when both Sir Duncan and Egg come across a fortune teller who apparently actually has magic in her and is able to see their futures, and proceeds to foretell that Duncan will be rich as a Lannister and Aegon will be king. Uh, but which Sir Duncan doesn't believe at all because he doesn't know Aegon's secret right yet, so he thinks it's just an amusing thing and gives her a penny and fucks off essentially. Uh, the reason why this is interesting to me is we essentially have confirmation that unless the writers of the show or George R.R. Martin himself decide to veer incredibly off script from the book, we should see several series of Sir Duncan being this essentially noble Giga Chad non-stop for at least a few seasons before it hopefully it potentially falls apart. which is unprecedented, and it's kind of alarming and poetic that it's Martin of all people who's forced to write this because of what I previously said about how he usually treats these noble characters. Again, the eponymous Eddard Stark and how he was treated.
Yeah. So is the show a sign that we're finally returning to, like, sincerity and idealism in fiction? No. Probably
No,
not.
not at all.
Almost
Not at
certainly
all.
not. But it's crumbs that were being thrown, basically, and apparently that's enough for people to, like, start crawling over each other and, like, frothing at the mouth for just these little crumbs nowadays. Cuz the show, when I was watching it, I thought it was just kind of meh until we got to about the end of episode 3, and that's when things got interesting with when it was revealed that Egg was a secret Targaryen, and we had the whole dilemma of the trial of 7, and that was interesting. But the show, for the most part, it's just okay. It's not something where you feel like you need to binge the whole way through it. So, yeah, you were gonna say something.
So I remember at one point there you said like I'm almost at the point where I'm looking forward to the next episode.
Yeah,
At one point, see, it almost gets to that point, but it hasn't quite reached
that
that Game of Thrones
actually,
level of
I
keeping you
remember.
hooked.
I remember the exact point that was. That was during the actual trial of 7, where the fight started, and then we went to the flashback, and I was saying, "Oh, we just finally gotten to the point where it was good, and now we're sucked back into the rather boring and meandering flashback, which it goes on for too long. It's not very efficient storytelling, the flashback." But
Yeah, because
yeah,
go
yeah,
ahead.
go ahead. No, you go ahead.
I was going to kind of that because the flashback is where we eventually see Dunk be taken on by Sir Arlen of Pennytree as his squire after he
That
essentially
said,
murders the two brigands.
the flashback is like 2/3 him and his friend wandering around Flea's Bottom, or whatever it's called.
Flea
Yeah,
bottom,
Flea
yeah,
Bottom.
flea bottom.
And then like 1/3 Duncan and Sir Arlen, if that. So you can
Yeah,
see the imbalance there. It isn't very efficient storytelling.
because we neither of us have read the original book, we can't really comment on how faithful the adaptation of Sir Arlen of Pennytree is. Because the way he's depicted in the show so far is we don't actually hear him talk too much, except for that one time when he's nearly dying and he's explaining the story of the penny tree to Duncan, um, in a flashback or a dream sequence. So Arlen is depicted very vaguely through these snapshots and flashbacks of what he actually is like as a person. He seems very crude and crass, but we do see him, like according to Duncan's narration, like very just, very strict with Duncan's upbringing as a squire, including not being shy of beating this 6 foot tall half giant every time he stepped out of line, or and giving pennies to the poor as he passes by a village, even though he's a poor hedge knight himself. So he's clearly a generous soul, and even when he's blind drunk, only half seeing a brigand outside attacking two urchins, comes out swinging to their defense, not even caring to ask their names or who they are or what was going on. We understand where Duncan gets a sense of honor from just by Duncan's own example and what he says of Sir Arlen. And we contrast it with how the show depicts Sir Arlen, where it seems as if he's very crass, as if he's very not very noteworthy or honorable, because he's depicted as incredibly drunk all the time, and he's depicted as a bit as whoring as well, or at least there was a line about that. We never actually see it. So it's left very vague what actually Sir Arlen actually was like for Sir Duncan to squire under. And it's even left ambiguous whether or not he actually knighted Sir Duncan, whether or not, especially at that ending scene there where it appeared as he died halfway through the Pennytree story, but then he came back to life to finish the story. So if you know the books, then you know the answer, but the rest of us are on tenterhooks. Marlon.
Yes. So, another thing to briefly touch on is the soundtrack in this show, which is rather odd.
All over the place. All over the place.
So In a medieval fantasy setting, it would be conventional for you to use not the instruments of the time necessarily, but older instruments, mainly like symphonic, orchestral music, and with a bit of more traditional medieval things thrown in, like tavern music tends to in these sorts of things tends to use that the more traditional medieval instruments. Whereas here we
Lutes.
get some lutes and lyres, and here we get some rather odd things. Like there is this one track which is very 2010s. There's a good part of it is just a whistling a tune, and then there's a bright acoustic guitar, and that feels a bit out of place, but not totally immersion breaking. And then we get to episode 6, where it starts with jazz music, just straight up jazz, which is very distracting. So while the music itself, at least
Isn't bad.
isn't, well, some of it is, but while most of it isn't that bad, it feels pretty unfitting and kind of takes you out of the action or the atmosphere for some of these scenes. So it's just an odd choice, and I'm not really sure what the rationale behind that was, or even if there was a rationale, or if because we're at the point in film and television production where people will just put music in because they think it's cool. Doesn't There's no rationale to how it's like suits the story or the atmosphere. It's just like, hey, this is an excuse to put my mixtape in the film.
I think there was a rationale and excuse, and the rationale is the redification of culture as well as budget issue. It might have been cheaper to just throw in to pay the royalties for a song and throw it in rather than make commission a piece itself. Because apart from like the opening strings of A Night of the Seven Kingdoms, there's no actual theme tune for the series like there is for a Game of Thrones, like that iconic stringed introduction for every time a Game of Thrones episode starts. That's is in this show at a few points, especially when Baelor comes in to say he was for Sir Duncan. That was a very good use of that theme at that time. That was very thematic and very appropriate.
Yeah, so
Compare
there
and
are
contrast with the
good.
jazz
Yeah,
theme the next episode over when he's under the elm tree, fucking recovering from his wounds.
yeah. So that's what we have to say about the soundtrack. It's odd choices, and the show isn't done yet, so obviously there's a lot of things with the plot and all general direction that we can't mm, come to a final judgment on. But so far, I would say at least it's a mixed bag. If you really have nothing else you'd rather be watching, it's worth a view. If you're into medieval history or tales of
Or
knights and chivalry, it might be worth a watch.
the action scene of the actual fight itself, though, was very good. You did see armored dudes beating the absolute
Yes,
seven
the
shades of
the
shit out of each other.
actual fight during the trial of seven, that was very well done. Although, um, we had the debate where it's like, is this an instance of armor being sliced through like butter, or is it actually protecting him? Because it's
No,
kind
no,
of hard. Yeah, go
I
ahead.
think it actually is because when you actually pause and things where see where Duncan actually hit Arian. Like when he got a sword and a good cut in on his inner thigh, that actually is a place knights would aim for
Right.
in medieval combat because it's a weak point,
I'm
and
more
you
like
can pierce
thinking when,
chainmail easier than plate.
yeah, I was more thinking when Duncan kept getting hit, and the chainmail, it was kind of ambiguous from the way the scene was shot, whether it was actually, protecting him much or not.
Well, that is true. Some of the things there, I think some of them were only very light piercings if it did pierce because chainmail. It is hard to get a sword through to chainmail, even at a full thrust. Although he did get him good in the leg once.
Yeah.
But the wound that gets me with Duncan is when he took a lance full in the kidney. Like that was several inches deep in him, and he just pulled that out and walked that off.
Yeah. So there is something magical to Duncan's ability to recover from wounds, because we see him get stabbed in I think his Achilles tendon in the flashback, and he just walks it off. Like you said, he gets the jousting lance to the kidney and a lot of other bruises, and seems like he's dead at one point, but he just gets back up and so
He's
on.
legally dead twice during the fucking fight. It's actually kind of unreal.
Yeah. So we can't comment on if that is some sort of magic thing or not, or if he's just built different, because we haven't read the book and the series is far from over. At least this. How long is the season supposed to be? 13 episodes.
I have no idea. It could even end the season right now, and it would actually, weirdly enough, tie up as a season and at 6 episodes, which
Yeah.
I don't know how to comment on that because it's very short as far as seasons go. But in terms of like a story arc finishing in 6 episodes successfully is kind of a writing achievement in itself.
Yeah, although it definitely feels more like the setup than a complete story on its own. Although you could end it here and feel like it's a satisfying conclusion, which is kind of why we decided to start commenting on it here, because the first 6 episodes are a full arc, even if there's a lot of loose ends not tied up, and if it feel even though it feels like not a ton really happened.
Not a ton happened, and also a lot happened, especially politically. Because Lionel Baratheon took the side against House Targaryen, and that's not a small thing. He's a lord of the Stormlands. But that's politics for later, essentially. Uh, the whole storyline, it ties up satisfactorily, kind of, because Raymond Fossray goes off and finds his own cadet branch of the Fossaways after his cousin essentially fucking disowns him for quote unquote betraying House Fossaway by not siding with him after his treachery was revealed. Um, and Fossaway, of course, marries a whore to start off his own household, and that's certainly a decision for you to make, young Fossaway. Not gonna bite you in the ass down the line.
Nope.
Uh,
Anyways, we'll
yeah,
open it up for
good.
questions now, if anyone in the audience has them. But you go ahead, Gallo. Continue with your point.
I would have, in terms of what I would have liked more of. I've already spoken on that. I would have done the entire series would have done much better without essentially Martin's signature crassness. Like you can have crass characters in an otherwise noble setting. Like Lionel Baratheon was always going to be an irreverent asshole, but he's one of those lovable assholes kind of archetypes, so that's acceptable. But when everyone is an irreverent, crass redditor, it just comes across as just tiresome in the year of our Lord 2026. It's just, do you even really? It, no one cares. It's not cool. It's not funny. No one likes Reddit humor. No one likes Fivsy Pop having all the characters swear all the time. It's not clever. It's not good writing. It it's not emotionally impactful. Like when you have a character say the word fuck, essentially, you have to like this is a writing
Ac-
thing. You can you can have a character say the word fuck, but you can't have it say all the time because it loses its impact.
yes, and actually, if I could go off on this, this is something that has become more and more prevalent in not even pop culture, but just casual conversation, to the point where it's beyond parody. Like, I recently went to a concert with some friends, and one of the bands there, the guy who was emceeing, he dropped the F bomb literally every other word, or in between every word. It was, hey, how the fuck are you fucking doing, everyone? We're gonna fucking have a great fucking time tonight, and stuff like that. And it's to the point where, the word, beyond losing all meaning, just becomes a noise. it's the equivalent of or ah at this point. People just say it and spout it out, and it just drags down the IQ of everyone listening as well as the speaker. And the fact that you come into, people talk like that all the time in daily life. So you come to your television or like, okay, let's take a break from the ums, the ahs, fucks, and all that. And then you turn on Night of Seven Kingdoms, your Martin slop, and everyone's dropping f bombs there every other word too. And it's like, thank you, I can't get away from it.
Yeah, I shouldn't slander Fuzzy Pup so easily because we haven't got to the animation episodes yet, and that's gonna be my own whole thing where I'm gonna have to hold my tongue on a lot of things. But back to this, when I brought that up because what I wanted to see more of is essentially see more nobility in speech, in dress, in actions. I want to see noble characters be noble, not in just a sense of just doing good and great things, but actually present themselves as sophisticated, as genteel, even in a rough knightly way. I want to see King Arthur's court. I want to see a Lancelot and a Gawain. I want to see all these things because we don't get them. Or to bring it back to your crumbs thing, there, everyone's just so starving. They're willing to crawl across broken glass for crumbs, but that is just real because we're so starved. We've been denied this sort of thing for so long. Even the hint of it is enough to get people's attention. I wouldn't be surprised if this series continues to do remarkably well just on that basis alone. Because realistically, what people want is not Game of Thrones. What people want is Game of Thrones if it was written like Lord of the Rings instead of like Martin Slop.
Yeah. Which this is, on the topic of the, adaptations of like nightly stories and all that. I am curious to see how this Daily Wire adaptation of the Pendragon cycle is going to be, because that's obviously more based in a, semi optimistic
Myth of
view
history.
of chivalry
Yeah.
and heroism, and that I doubt it'll be good. It probably won't, because that's just the way things are nowadays. It's hard to find people with the proper talents and attitude towards that sort of an attitude towards the source material to actually do it right. But I'm sure people will, if they're, crawling over broken glass for this, they'll watch that. And so I'm curious to see how that turns out as well. But aside from Night of the Seven Kingdoms and that, I can't think of what other, story fantasy chivalric stories or adaptations we've got. And another
Well,
point
there's
that,
Rings of Power, and then
yeah.
there's House of the Dragon. And the
Rings
less
of
said about
Power,
both of those
yeah,
things,
yeah. The
yeah,
one
the less said about both those things, the better. Yeah.
no one
Go ahead.
watched, but everyone talks about. Yeah. So hopefully Night of the Seven Kingdoms, you know, stays, at the very least, stays watchable and good. Hopefully, maybe it'll even get better, and hopefully the Pendragon cycle thing is good. But I don't think we've actually had a good Arthurian adaptation since Excalibur in the
Excalibur.
'80s. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I can't even think of a single one. Maybe a few video games that took some liberties. Like I remember one King Arthur RTS video game that I liked. Took a lot of liberties. Like the Anglo-Saxons were Christian and the Welsh were pagan, which is the exact inverse of reality. But it was fun. It was fun. It took the religious mechanics seriously. It took the knighthood and the quests and RPG mechanics seriously. I like that. But other than things like that, I can't think of any, especially when it comes to movie or TV shows. There was that TV series Merlin based on Merlin becoming essentially the wizard he was, and King Arthur was essentially being raised as a prince rather than finding his destiny. That was a thing. That was all right. It had a bit of criticism for some historical things, but it was all right. I remember it being all right and not really offensive. But I can't. There was nothing really good. especially Arthurian. And I will not give the Green Knight movie recently with the dignity of being reviewed. That needs to be forgotten.
I already forgot it
Please.
until you brought it up.
And if any of you know which movie I'm talking about, you know why I said what I did.
Yeah. So, what the lesson to take away from today's episode, I guess, is that you give a starving man even the most mediocre foul food, and he'll act like it's a feast. So,
I'm willing to give this Martin slop the benefit of the doubt so far, if only because George R.R. Martin has basically wrote himself into a corner that he has to continue showing Duncan as being a noble knight because of the legacy he leaves behind him in A Song of Ice and Fire.
yeah. So,
So we are going to get more Duncan being Duncan. I'm confident of
yes.
that at least.
Yes, but will it be entertaining, or are they going to keep throwing us into boring side tangents that don't go anywhere? Either way, the show is good enough. People seem to like it. If you really have nothing else to watch, go ahead and watch it. Or if you're starving like Gallo is for, knights and castles and all that, that's another good reason to watch it. So let's see if we have any questions.
Not really, just a few comments.
Nope. Yep. Okay. Any closing comments you want to give, Gallo?
The cinematography actually is pretty on point. I will give them that. And the use of lighting outside of like the initial joust at nighttime is pretty well used. And that's often a complaint we have with a lot of movies and TV shows. So it is competently directed, and the costume design is hit or miss, but with some armors being misses like the Kingsguard, but the rest of them being pretty on point, from realistic like Duncans to fantastic like Fossaways and Baratheons and Targaryens to even like the noble clothes of some of the lords is just very immaculate. I like this attention to detail. It's probably what's costing most of the budget, but it's all right. Uh, so it is not quite a spectacle or feast for the eyes, but it is nice. It's not as drab as most medieval things or things. It is colorful. I like that. So at least that much you won't be bored visually.
Yes. So that's what we have to say on A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms for now. Perhaps once the season wraps up, we'll revisit it. But until then, thank you everyone for watching. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, share it around if you enjoyed it. We would like to get more traction and have get out there so we can do interviews with other creators, independent creators who are actually creating things that are good, just good, not good enough, but actually enjoyable and high quality. And so please, if you have any suggestions for things we can cover or guests we can have on, leave those in the comments or DM us on Twitter. And if that is all, Gallo, did you have anything else, or shall I sign
No,
off?
we'll just sign off. Thank you for being with us here. It was a pleasure having you.
Yes, and we will see you in 2 weeks when we cover our next topic. Thank you, everyone, for watching, and goodbye.